I've always been fascinated by Apocalypse as an antagonist, and it's not just because of his insane powers or his world-ending potential. What intrigues me the most is his ability to turn certain individuals into his horsemen and make them do his bidding. If you're following the ongoing X-Men 97, you've probably seen what becomes of Gambit as Apocalypse raises him from the dead as one of his horsemen. There are plenty of other similar examples across the animated and cinematic universe, and of course, in the extensive X-Men comics. But what really becomes of someone when they're turned into one of Apocalypse's horsemen? What mental and physical changes do they undergo, and is it possible to undo the effect entirely? Well, if you've wondered about these questions too, sit tight for this video, because I'll explain everything there is to know about the whole Horsemen saga. What is a Horseman of Apocalypse, and why does he need them? Apocalypse might be supremely powerful with access to cosmic technology, but he still needs allies when he fights some of his toughest adversaries. Moreover, across the history of Apocalypse, he has always been someone who enjoyed ruling over others and receiving devotion from his followers. Maybe the whole Horseman thing is a combination of both. His horsemen can be described as enhanced superhumans chosen by him as his greatest followers and soldiers. They are his personal warriors who can be unleashed when he wants, and they always have a key role to play in his plans of conquest and domination. He makes certain changes in them, and these enhancements are caused by both biological and genetic manipulation. Of course, his celestial technology also comes in handy. The use of the four horsemen is largely symbolic, and their powers are usually directly related to their namesake. When he chooses mutants, and in rare cases non-mutants, to turn them into his horsemen, he makes sure that they have the powers that he requires them to have. Even if the individual didn't possess those powers initially, Apocalypse can augment their powers to suit their roles better. Who were the first horsemen? There have been many to take up the mantle, and some of their antics have changed the course of the narrative entirely. But do you know about the first horsemen? They were the sons and daughters of Apocalypse and Genesis from the ancient mutant land of Okara, and they were the first ones to lead the fight for Apocalypse. Back in 2620 BC, when the Brood invaded Egypt, Apocalypse and his horsemen left Okara, and later they fought the invaders. The horsemen sacrificed themselves in this conflict, and Apocalypse built them a monument, but he still needed new horsemen to replace his lost children. For some time, he sought for horsemen among his own bloodline, but eventually he had to look elsewhere and recruit others. How does Apocalypse pick his horsemen? Well, it's always too systematic for Apocalypse, and he never picks his horsemen randomly. Historically, he's always chosen people who fit into a certain philosophy, power set, and an emotional set which suits him best. He then reshapes and molds them into living weapons that embody war, death, famine, or pestilence. If I have to identify some of his core criteria, I think the first one has to be some alignment with his philosophy. Of course, there are many exceptions, but he definitely prefers individuals who already believe in the harsh survival of the fittest theory and are willing to kill and dominate others for a cause that they fight for. Then you have many of the horsemen who are volunteers, and they strike a deal with Apocalypse for power, purpose, or revenge, and in return, they provide Apocalypse with undying loyalty. It goes without saying that Apocalypse is drawn to strength, and the raw power of an individual might make him a more suitable candidate than others. For instance, in the X-Men Apocalypse film, he chooses Magneto as his Horseman of War because of his unique ability to control metal and create massive destruction. Another crucial factor can be the emotional vulnerability of a mutant, because Apocalypse is cunning enough to know what can be exploited. Someone who has been weakened or crippled fits into his scheme of things perfectly, because they are easier to turn with the promise of power. Lastly, it always comes down to a general usefulness, and the only reason Apocalypse really chooses someone as his horseman is because the individual can help his cause in some way once he has been enhanced and molded. Now that I've laid out the basics of his horsemen and how they work, let me focus on the changes that take place once a mutant is turned into one. What physical changes take place when someone is turned into a horseman? It's usually a combination of mental and physical changes when someone is turned into a horseman, but the physical changes are often more noticeable. As I've said before, Apocalypse rewrites their body genetically and technologically in order to turn them into a living weapon, and the effects are drastic. With access to celestial technology and his knowledge of genetic engineering and techno-organic augmentation, Apocalypse can alter the DNA of his horsemen and their cellular structure entirely. The goal is very simple. He turns them into an extremely enhanced version of their original self, and even adds new biological functions or organs to support this. The physiology of the mutant is pushed beyond natural limits, and they usually become a lot more durable and powerful than before. In some cases, the transformation is more of a rearrangement of the physical body, and it can be so radical that the individual has to later relearn basic biological functions. What makes the physical changes so special is that they're mostly role-specific and not unnecessary. For instance, if we look at the Horsemen of Death, their skin and hair are often darker or pale, which looks more monstrous overall. If a mutant has wings or missing limbs or other appendages, these might be altered, enhanced, or fixed depending on the situation. Let us consider one of his infamous horsemen, Archangel. He was one of Xavier's first X-Men, but when his natural wings were severely damaged in battle, Apocalypse turned him into his Archangel of Death in X-Factor number 24 from 1986. In this case, he replaced his damaged wings with razor-sharp metal blades. Apocalypse can induce painful and invasive augmentation. It's not exactly a smooth process to turn someone into his horseman, and there are examples where Apocalypse has dealt with some kind of invasive augmentation. These can be extremely painful because they tamper with the physical structure, and machines and instruments burrow deep into the flesh as they work through the body. The spinal cord and even the nervous system are manipulated at times. In fact, some stories of Apocalypse turning someone into his horseman show that the transformation device can almost act like a living thing, where it carries out the process independently once it's started. As far as a major physical augmentation is concerned, I can think of Wolverine, who also served briefly as one of his horsemen. This was after the time Magneto had ripped the adamantium out of his skeleton, and Apocalypse restored the adamantium and brainwashed him in Wolverine number 145 from 1988. Also, there are some visible changes in the appearance of an individual. The skin and hair color usually changes, and the eyes may glow in some cases, or even change color. Even the size of an individual and their original build might be changed if required, and Apocalypse makes them more massive and stronger. Mutants can have their damaged parts replaced and enhanced. There are some who have chosen to serve as the Horsemen of Apocalypse because the rewards are far too otherworldly. I've already told you about the case of Archangel and how Apocalypse gave him metal wings to replace his damaged ones. He does the same with Sunfire, who lost both his legs and got his powers absorbed by Rogue. Apocalypse offered to restore his legs and powers in return for his loyalty and service, and this is an offer that is really difficult to refuse when one is vulnerable. Sunfire agreed to join him in X-Men number 182 from 2004, and there are a few other examples where mutants have voluntarily signed up to get their damaged parts replaced and enhanced, or simply to acquire more power. How are mutant powers amplified by Apocalypse? The best part about turning someone into his horseman is how it involves strengthening them way more than they originally were. Apocalypse not only amplifies their original mutant powers, but also makes certain alterations that makes them stronger than before, and in some cases, develop new powers entirely. He rewrites and supercharges their existing mutation with celestial technology, biochips, and genetic techno-organic augmentation, like I said before. The result not only delivers stronger powers, but also adds powers that operate on a larger scale with greater control. Take the example of Gambit. He is a powerful mutant without a doubt, but as Apocalypse's Horseman of Death, he is absolutely devastating. The changes with respect to power are rather simple, where you will see that Apocalypse amplifies the power output so that the mutant can affect larger areas and a greater number of targets. Their endurance is significantly boosted, which allows them to operate at peak power for extended periods without any exhaustion. They also regenerate faster than before, and this unique healing ability means that they cannot be defeated under normal circumstances. Apocalypse adds weapons and armor as needed. If you check out the Horsemen of Apocalypse, you will realize that they are not just physically enhanced, near-perfect warrior servants, but also have the gear that they need. The broken-winged mutant gets a perfect wing, and the crippled mutant regains the power of his legs. But more importantly, Apocalypse knows who needs what under the given circumstances. There are cases where he has given them armor as well, such as the case of Polaris, when Apocalypse's armor concealed her identity until Wolverine unmasked her. Is every horseman mind-controlled? How does the brainwashing work? I know it's a common notion that a Horseman of Apocalypse is completely mind-controlled by him, but there is more to it. Firstly, not everyone is mind-controlled, because some simply don't need to be mind-controlled. Apocalypse simply exerts his belief and plans, and those who might oppose them need to be subjugated. I think the case of Gambit explains this the best, because in the comics, Gambit tried to infiltrate the forces of Apocalypse, and he allowed Apocalypse to transform him into the Horseman of Death in X-Men number 183 from 2004. What he did not account for is that it would change him entirely, and he was brainwashed in a way that his personality was overridden by his death persona. Until he was eventually freed from Apocalypse's control, Gambit had no control over his thoughts and actions, and he even fought the X-Men. Even Psylocke joined the Horsemen to save Angel, but she fell under the mind-controlling influence of Apocalypse. When Apocalypse turns someone into his Horseman and wants to control their mind as well, he rewires them entirely to become loyal to him, regardless of their previous feelings. This works more like a genetic brainwashing and deep psychological conditioning, so don't confuse this with something as weak as hypnotism. There's a saying in the comics that the one who enters the machine that transforms them into a horseman is not the same as the one who emerges. Of course, not everyone needs to be mind-controlled, because there are always a few power-hungry individuals who do this just for the sake of themselves. They have personal motives fueled by revenge or greed, and they voluntarily serve Apocalypse as his horseman without needing to be brainwashed. So it's not a compulsory outcome of the transformation, but one that Apocalypse can choose to implement. Also, I've observed that turning into Apocalypse's horseman alters certain basic aspects of an individual. Their feelings of compassion and guilt are suppressed so that they can obey the orders of Apocalypse without judgment or question. I guess this basic level of mind control is needed for almost every horseman, because Apocalypse wouldn't want them to turn back on him at any point. Is it possible to undo the transformation? Now, this is a really big question, because the state of serving as Apocalypse's horseman thankfully doesn't have to be permanent. The easy answer is yes, it's possible to undo the effects of the transformation, and many powerful mutants have been brought back to their original form. Archangel rejoined the X-Men after his stint with Apocalypse, but he continued to struggle with the effects of his time spent serving him. Following the apparent death of Apocalypse, the Death Seed in Archangel's body activated and got him transformed into his successor, and the X-Men finally managed to free him from the Apocalypse persona. Even for Gambit, the Horseman of Death persona resurfaced a few times even after he was freed from Apocalypse's control. So as you can see here, it is possible to undo the transformation, but a lingering effect remains and can pose a threat as a ticking time bomb that can go off at any time. Of course, this doesn't happen to everyone who has served as a horseman, but there are enough examples to not ignore this as an anomaly. Can Apocalypse transform someone who isn't a mutant? Well, the records will probably show you that most of those who have served as Apocalypse's horsemen were mutants. But that doesn't mean that he can't get the job done with a non-mutant individual. There's an interesting precedence in the comics where Apocalypse once turned Hulk into his Horseman of War in the pages of Incredible Hulk from 1962. During this time, Hulk was vulnerable and troubled by his visions of Banner's father and a shard of shrapnel in his brain. Apocalypse turned him into his horseman, removed the shrapnel, and gave him a helmet to contain his thoughts. Eventually, Hulk got his control back over his mind, but only after he injured his old friend, Rick Jones. I guess this just goes to show how versatile Apocalypse really is, and that he doesn't need a particular skill set in order to turn someone into his horseman. How does X-Men 97 explore the Horsemen of Apocalypse? X-Men 97 has blended the best of the comic book stories with their own innovation to create a captivating storyline. One of the defining moments, of course, is the way he transforms Gambit into one of his horsemen, the Horseman of Death. Now, in this case, Gambit was already dead, so there was more magic than technology. But the transformation might not have gone exactly as he intended. Gambit turned into a darker and deadlier version of himself, and even he gained the ability to mind control and turn others into his own horsemen. The transformed Gambit has a darker appearance with glowing red eyes, but he doesn't lack compassion or feelings, especially toward his lady love, Rogue. Even in this state, he plans on uniting with her forever, and eventually Xavier and Rogue are able to pull him away from the consciousness of Apocalypse. The season finale will probably give further insights into how it works out because, as of now, Gambit is down and out, and there is no certainty whether he will awaken as himself or as Apocalypse. X-Men Apocalypse 2016 also explores his Horseman of Death. This might not be the most popular movie among the fans, but it does explore the Horseman of Death. Here, his original horsemen die protecting him back in 3600 BC, and later, when he's awakened by Moira McTaggart, he turns Aurora Monroe, aka Storm, into one of his followers or horsemen. The other horsemen are Psylocke, Angel, and of course, Magneto. When Apocalypse shows Magneto the true extent of his powers, he joins willingly, but later he turns on Apocalypse along with Storm. Aside from the recent animated series and the 2016 movie, the original 90s animated show also featured Apocalypse and his horsemen, in the two-part episode titled Come the Apocalypse. Angel, who is undergoing treatment for what he believes to be the cure for his mutant condition, ends up undergoing the process of turning into one of Apocalypse's horsemen. He also turns Warren into the Horseman of Death, and in this episode, you can see both power alteration and psychological control caused as a result. In Marvel terms, Apocalypse is definitely an Avengers-level threat, and his Horseman mechanism only adds to his power. I hope this video was insightful in learning about the traits of his horsemen and how the change actually occurs. This is an aspect that can be preserved for future movies and storylines because it allows a lot of flexibility into the characters who can be picked as an unexpected villain. I mean, if it can happen to Gambit or Wolverine, it can happen to anyone. Let me know in the comments below what you think of his horsemen, and also share your views on what you think will happen to Gambit in X-Men 97. If you appreciate the efforts to bring you this content, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more such videos.